Hi, everybody. This is Craig Hardesty with Out on Film, and I want to welcome you back to Out on Film's In Conversations With. And today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have part of the team behind the movie Bloodthirsty. We have director Amelia Moses and the
Hi.
two stars of the movie, Lauren Beatty and Catherine Kingso. So welcome all of you to Out on Film.
Thanks for
Thanks for having
having
us.
Um, so I want to start because I'm always curious. How stories find people, how people find stories. So Amelia, I'll start with you. How did you come to tell this story and tell it now?
Yeah, so I had kind of finished up my first feature, which is actually out on the festival circuit as well now, and that was also a horror film. And I was like, yeah, I was finishing that film, and I was trying to look at distribution options in Canada for kind of, like a really low budget indie. And I happened to meet through a mutual friend, Mike Peterson, who's one of the producers on Bloodthirsty. And we just started chatting and had similar kind of sensibilities in terms of, working in Canada and working within genre and all that kind of stuff. And he said, "Oh, I'm looking for a director for a project right now." So we kind of talked about that. And I assumed that it was still like in development. But he's like, "No, we're shooting in 2 months in Calgary. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Sure." So I met with Wendy, who's the writer and the other producer, and they decided to pick me for the project. And yeah, it was a very, very quick pre-production. And as soon as I read the script, I thought of both Lauren and Catherine for a variety of reasons, but they both auditioned pretty early on in the process. And both them, I think, had very little time to prepare as well. I think the three of us were all kind of thrown into it in different ways. But yeah, so that's how I came on board.
And Lauren, I know that Amelia just said she thought of the two of you, but what made you, as you read this, I mean, aside you're working actors, of course, I mean, I get the obvious that you want to work, but other than that, kind of, what was it about it that made you say, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like that this story was very much female led. Um, and that she's a queer character and wanting to play more roles that like I see myself represented in. Um, and honestly, it was also, Amelia being the director. And a big part of it was the music in it. I mean, as soon as I heard some of the songs that I had to learn for the audition, I was just sold because I mean, it's as soon as I heard those songs, I could just like picture the whole film, and I was like, I would love to be part of this. So, yeah.
And you get to you are playing a lesbian character who is also a werewolf, who is also a singer.
Just ticks all the boxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything that Lauren is in her daily
real life represented on screen.
Just like,
Yeah.
it's almost autobiographical. And Catherine, how did you find your way to Charlie?
Yeah, so Amelia and I actually went to the same film production program. She was above me, but we sort of were aware of each other's work, and we'd done a music video together, and I'd sort of seen Amelia like graduate and go on to do all these amazing things. And so I was a really big fan of her work. So yeah, it was kind of very similar to Lauren, like when she contacted me, it kind of wasn't a question that I was interested. It was mostly just like logistics of like timing and all of that kind of stuff. But in terms of like, I don't know, just that like Amelia would align herself with a project that you'd want to like be part of, basically. Yeah, and I think reading the script, it was really awesome. I think the character of Charlie was like very much a badass on paper. And I just thought there was like a lot of fun things that I could do with that part, and a lot of like fun moments. And also it's horror. I don't know. There was just a lot that could kind of inspire you as an actor for sure.
And so, and I'll throw this out to all of you, but let's start with Amelia. It's a horror film. It's not a horror film in the traditional ways that we normally see horror films. And I have to say, full disclosure, I've never been a huge fan of horror, but when I saw this, I'm like, if this is where horror is going, I can really I can get into this because it feels so different. I mean, there's still the common tropes. I mean, it's the isolation. I mean, there's the recognizable horror components, but you take this places that I haven't scene. And I just wonder if, how you approach a film or perspectively, almost kind of turning it on its head. It's not a traditional horror film. It's not a traditional female empowerment film. I mean, it's really about kind of transformation and the monster in all of us, or maybe
Yeah,
the
for
monster in
sure.
all of us.
Yeah, definitely artists. Artists can have some monsters inside of them. Yeah, I think that horror, for me at least, is like a very huge spectrum of things. So, there's lots of horror cinema that I'm not really interested in, like things like Saw or whatever. It's just like not really my cup of tea. But I think there's a huge range of things within that genre, and there's also a lot of expectations and tropes that you can then subvert. And that's what I find really exciting about it as a genre, is like audiences go in thinking one thing and you can play around with that. You can embrace it, you can switch it up, whatever. So definitely I had those things in the back of my mind making this film. And I did kind of a similar approach with my first feature as well, in terms of kind of a cabin in the woods film.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's what really appeals to me. And for me as well, like, I don't believe that horror films have to be like scary. For me, I'm trying to like think more about like tone, making something creepy and eerie and feel like off and unsettling, rather than like, a jump scare or something like that.
Right.
So that's kind of more my approach to horror. But I think it is really like a hugely vast genre that you can do a lot with it.
And for Lauren and Catherine, I mean, as you're looking at, being, in a horror film that, has the components, you've got the blood, you've got some of the gore. I mean, you have those things, but it's also, like you said, it's also a very different kind of narrative going in here. How do you approach it as actors? I mean, I know these things are not shot sequentially, how we view them. I mean, so how do you keep that kind of tone going through, as you're embracing each scene?
Yeah, what really was helpful for me, and like Amelia kind of touched on, like this film it's like very character driven, more than I guess your typical horror film. But what was really helpful for me was that before we started shooting, we had about a day to sort of like go through things when we all got to Edmonton. But Amelia sat down with me and we split up the script into like sections, and titled those sections. So I think the beginning one was Prey. So, it'd be like scene 1 to scene 14, it's prey. Like that's the state that Gray is in as a person. She feels like she is being preyed upon. She's like a puppet, and then we took it through the different kind of transformations that the character goes through and broke those down into sections of the script. So that was really helpful for me, because when we were shooting out of order, as you do, it was very like helpful for me to see, okay, this is the chunk of the the transformation of this character that we're in. So it helped me just get into that headspace depending on the scene. And I do think that really like translated in the film. I think for like myself as a viewer, I can see, I think, more clearly that progression than if, say, we hadn't done that. So yeah, that was very, very helpful for me as an actor.
You're also in it like pretty much every scene as well. So I think that's something too, when something is really from like this singular main character point of view, like you're with them the whole time. So you got to make sure that you're like understanding their journey. But exactly. And then for Lauren to just like be always working on set, like there's less downtime.
Yeah, I was gonna say also, we were staying in this hotel in the middle of winter that was honestly like pretty far away from everything. Right. So we didn't have to imagine certain aspects of this film. And also I think it was really easy to just like fully focus on the project that we were working on, because it wasn't like we were in our normal lives or like, being distracted by daily things. And so we kind of like, we got to know the crew really well, we got to know each other really well, and that was really, I think, just like everything that we were thinking about during those weeks.
Yeah.
So the central relationship, I know that there's 3, but the central relationship with Charlie and Gray, what I kind of really found so compelling about it was that, you know, it wasn't like Charlie wasn't a sidekick or the love interest, but an integral part of this relationship between Gray and Vaughn too,
Yeah.
and how you portrayed that on screen. Um, how did you two kind of approach, you know, that relationship to keep it authentic, but keep it connected? Because you can see where Charlie is trying to pull Gray, you know, back and like, come with me. um, you know,
Yeah.
and it's really that kind of a dynamic relationship that I felt so compelling throughout the whole film.
Thank you. That's right. That's very
Yeah.
sweet.
Uh,
Yeah, I think like for both Lauren and myself, as queer actors who kind of are pretty outspoken about that in the industry, and like that sort of involves a lot of our work that we either, you know, produce or that we take part in as actors. So I think, I don't know, I guess there's this kind of like genuine shared image of like what we were creating with those characters, that I think from the beginning, at least I felt we had a very similar like view of what that was going to be and like what that relationship would look like. And I think, yeah, it wasn't really for either of us about necessarily like playing the queerness of it, because I think that's something that is already integral to us as people. And so we kind of just like played what was happening in the movie. And it's cool to hear that like it resonated with you.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. It's you know, because the queerness is just inherently like, I mean, in us, and it's like written into the script. It's like we just wanted to play this, I think, as authentic as possible. Just like this is a relationship.
yeah.
These two people, you know, it's not like the major plot point of the film that it's a queer relationship. It just is. And I think that's another thing that was really cool for me about this film, is that it's not made to be this like huge deal. It's just this genuine relationship between these two women, and they
Right,
find themselves in a crazy situation.
we come into the relationship, they're already in it,
Yeah.
which is nice, you know, for us. And while we're just talking about it, let's just dive into all the queerness here. You know, we are all about representation, you know, out on film. You know, it's what we do. We talk about it incessantly, probably, you know, but I think it's important. And so I'm curious, you know, lesbians playing a lesbian storyline, you know, we talk a lot about who tells our stories, who should tell our stories. And so, and we're still finding that it's not that common. You have two lesbians playing the lesbian couple, you know, and how important is that for you as it is for us? I mean, as your actors, working actors, like being able to tell our stories.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as you can imagine, it's amazing. I think that I've been for so long hoping, you know, that, and like pleading, you know, really telling my agents and stuff in the past, like, I'm queer. I really want to like play queer roles. Like, please, please, please submit me for queer stuff. I'm queer, like just rubbing it in their faces. And I think, you know, over the years, I've seen more and more things kind of like popping up that I've gone out for, which is amazing. But, and then, you know, ultimately, most of the time, the people that end up getting cast aren't actually queer. And I think that was really cool for me in this film, that like Amelia, you know, and the team actually wanted to cast queer actors in queer roles, which is, you know, I think what we should always be striving for, because, you know, it just brings an authenticity, like a truth to these characters that you wouldn't necessarily get. So yeah, it's super important to me, and feel honored to represent the community.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I think
Catherine.
it's a big part of, I mean, because I think as an actor, when you belong to any minority group, you sort of, you subconsciously sign up to like then become like you represent everyone from that group
Right.
whenever you do anything. And it's like the more and more I'm in this business, the more and more I'm realizing like how exciting that can be, but also like how heavy that can be and how hard that can be when sometimes like you might sign up for something and then it doesn't turn out to be like what you thought, you know what I mean? And then you're just like, did I misrepresent all lesbians or all Asian people today? You know what I mean? Like it's hard. But I think I'm at a point now in my career where, because I was so outspoken and I made a web series years ago, and like I run the LGBT group at my union, like stuff like that. So people are very aware. So I tend to get cast more. And actually it's funny you were saying like the idea of having two lesbians play two lesbians. Like I have another film coming out called Voyeurs soon, where like my girlfriend is also played by a queer person, but like this was not a reality that I thought would exist even a few years ago. And I think it did take a lot of like sort of producing your own stuff or really like pushing for that to sort of make it part of our careers. And I think we both kind of had to like go through this struggle a little bit to be like, this is something that's important to me. And I think especially if you're a person who, I mean, like is more femme or whatever, that you have to talk about these issues a lot, I think, for it to be like part of your career.
Do you think it's getting better? I mean, are we going? I mean, it seems slow, but you know, and we always wonder, is it getting better? And you know, as we're programming every year, we're looking at content. I mean, how is it for all of you? I mean, is it getting? Where do you think we are in terms of representation, especially lesbian representation?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, like I was kind of touching on, like I've seen more representation recently than I have in past years. And yeah, I've seen more, you know, auditions for queer roles and stuff like that. So I think like slowly but surely we're seeing more representation, but there always needs to be more, you know,
Yeah.
It's going to take, I think, a long time for us to kind of feel like we're having equal representation. But yeah, I mean, I think we're on a good trajectory.
Yeah.
You're seeing, yeah, I mean, I like, how about for you guys? Are you seeing more, like more things being submitted?
I wanted to ask because I was like, you've been programming for like, I want to know if it seems like
it seems like we're on a good trajectory. I would say from our point of view that we would want more lesbian content, where we have been focused in recent years, lesbian stories, because we don't see them in the same numbers as we see maybe gay male stories or even now sometimes trans stories. But really, you know, I think you're right. I think we're getting there, but I think we still want to see more lesbian content. So anybody listening out there with Lauren and Catherine.
yeah. We'll do it. Fine.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Yeah. And I think also it's like when certain things almost become like a fad in mainstream culture, then you get all of these like large production companies being like, we want to do one too, which can be helpful sometimes, but then there's been so many stories that are like, here are these two like white, able-bodied, like skinny, straight performers playing like a lesbian story. And for some people, because we're like so starved of representation, that's enough. But I feel like hopefully we're getting to the point where that doesn't have to be like the only option, and that we can have more diverse stories and have more stories that are coming from people that are actually like part of the community. And so I think it kind of feels like Lauren was saying, like we're on the precipice of something really big happening. But it definitely is like, it still feels like a fight sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, I think I think that seems very real. That we're getting there, but we'd like to be further than where we are.
Yeah. You can only have so many versions of Ammonite, you know?
Right.
Before you're like,
You know, we have so
Okay.
many sad lesbians in
I know.
corsets. Yeah.
We've talked about it, like, no more dead lesbian. Come on, let's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Stay alive.
Yeah. So, Amelia, as I said, it was important for you all to cast lesbians in these roles. As you thought about that, kind of what was the driving force when you're thinking about both in terms of in front of the camera and behind the camera, kind of where we are in terms of representation?
Yeah, I think for me, how I really saw this particular story was like, it's a horror film about a werewolf singer and there's a lesbian couple. And it's not like the queerness is not the plot point of the film. And I think obviously there's space for that, but that is also what we typically see, is that being like the plot of the film. So for me, I was like, I really just wanted it to feel like absolutely no different than a straight couple. And that, I think, just for this particular film, again, like I think for me, like what Catherine was saying as well, just like a variety of things, because that's what we need, is just like different stuff by different filmmakers and different perspectives within, looking at queer relationships or however whatever you want to look at. But so for me, it was really just kind of like not drawing attention to it as well. Like, I think in the original script, there was maybe like a couple times where there's like slight kind of microaggressions of slight homophobia, where it's like, look, they're gay. And I was like, nah, like, let's just not. Because like, it just doesn't, that's not to say people don't deal with homophobia all the time. Of course, it's like an issue that someone can explore in a film. But I think when it's like every gay film you see is going to be like, okay, look, there's so much homophobia. It's like, sometimes you just don't need that in a certain film, especially when this film is not about queer identity, it's just not about that. So that was kind of my goal, was just to feel kind of just nothing different, I guess. Yeah.
I will say, I'm going to say, Lauren, I agree with you with authenticity and feeling it, because I know we were watching it, and at the end, I'm like, I think they're lesbians. I'm going to go look them up, because that's what we do.
So job well done, basically.
Wow.
Job well done. I was like, I know that.
That is the best compliment.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate it, and that's kind of why I ask and want to, that we try to give this platform to promote actors and filmmakers, because we do think it's important that we, we can share, but I think, to take the lead in telling our stories, as only we can, and so I appreciate that part. And kind of going on what Amelia was just saying, is that the movie is about a lot, and at its center, it's really about art and artists. And I was curious to hear from each of you, as artists making a movie, where art is so central, how it affects how you think about your own artistic process. Because we have, Gray, who is, being consumed and through her art. We have Charlie, who is an artist who has a completely different kind of approach, and her art takes a different form. And I'm just wondering, with the three of you, as you kind of think about your own artistic processes, kind of what do we take away kind of about the role of art and artistic process and drive and ambition and hunger and a whole host of things?
Yeah, I think this particular film takes a pretty pessimistic view of it, which I'm all okay for, because I like looking at the darker side of things. I think that's what made me interested in it thematically in the script, was really just that kind of premise of like this, someone pushing themselves into a kind of monstrous place with art, because I think art making can be inherently selfish in a lot of ways. Like most artists have, despite themselves, an ego where they're like, well, I am the best at this, because you're going to have to be slightly delusional or else you won't be motivated to make stuff. So I think that's something I wouldn't say I'm similar to Gray in the capacities that she goes to, but relating with those kind of darker thoughts, where sometimes maybe you do isolate yourself when going through the creative process or whatever, because to some extent you have to, but also I think life is such a balance of all the things you do, and art is just one of them. And that's something definitely that I feel like I've seen in my own life of like the way Gray kind of just like pushes Charlie aside, you know, and it's like, again, I've never done something that extreme, but like that kind of sentiment where sometimes you aren't really like prioritizing, you know, the people around you as much because you're very self-focused. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think this film for me as an artist was pretty cathartic, I'm gonna say. Yeah, you know, as an artist, and I mean, I know Lowell wrote this film from like a very like autobiographical kind of standpoint where she was working on trying to write an album and experiencing writer's block, and kind of writing about that like monster inside of you that kind of like comes to the surface because, you know, you're not, you know, performing, I guess, in the way that you want to be, and that makes you angry and frustrated, and yeah, playing with kind of like the darkness, I guess, that you can experience as an actor or as an artist. And I've definitely had that. You know, I've experienced writer's block, I've experienced imposter syndrome like crazy. You know, all those things, wrestling with like finding my voice, who really am I, like how do I want to represent myself as an artist, as an actor, feeling you know, quieted, feeling silenced, feeling like I can't really express myself, you know, all those things. And that's clearly very much what Gray is going through. And so I found it very cathartic to kind of play this character going through those same emotions, and really finding her voice through, you know, a pretty dramatic outcome. But, you know, it's that, and I've said this quote a bunch of times because someone said it in an interview with us, and I just love this quote, but it's like about how, you know, everyone has the capacity for monstrosity, and seeing that is like pretty powerful, especially in women, because you see that a lot in men and it's kind of like championed and whatever, but when a woman shows that capacity, it's not seen in the same light, it's seen as like a bad thing. So it was really cool to explore that, and you know, the whole idea of transformation for me was very cool, because I think as a woman I'm always transforming myself to fit into like any situation, you know, like in the way that I think I am expected to fit into that situation. So I think as women, like we're always transforming ourselves. So it was kind of cool when I thought about that kind of, you know, metaphor. But yeah.
And kind of Catherine, as you kind of think about that, you know, part of Charlie, I mean, Charlie is a painter, you know, and is involved in her own process, but also watching Gray, I mean, you know, go through a process that Charlie would even say, this is beautiful, and yet I'm seeing this as destructive, you know, at the same time. And where are we going as Gray gets almost starting to get feral? I mean, so kind of as you think about it as an artist, kind of how did you kind of embrace that whole kind of dynamic between those different artistic kind of perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what practice, I think it's very familiar to me, I guess, this idea of like, how much will you sacrifice for your career or like for your art? And I think, you know, as actors too, it's like down to like your schedule or what city you're going to be in, or all of these things you kind of like hand over to the gods of, you know, and so you do, like, it takes over a lot of your life, and it can be so rewarding. But I definitely think like that's very synonymous with this film, where it's like, in order for her, well, for Gray to like achieve what she knows she can for her work, you know, her relationship gets sabotaged and all these other things in her life sort of like derail. And I think no matter what practice you're in, there are elements, I guess, of, do you prioritize your work over over your life balance and all of these
Yeah.
things. Like, how far do you go?
Right.
Like filmmaking, you can really like, if you don't put up boundaries, you can be working 24/7 on a
Right.
project. Amelia's nodding like she gets it. Like, you can
Very
really-
relatable content.
yeah, and so I definitely think that is like super familiar and something I can really like empathize with, I guess, for the whole like what's going on in the movie. And so yeah, but I definitely think it's interesting that like both characters were artists sort of doing their practices in like the same space, and how that almost like comes to head in a way. And that was a big way of how Charlie in the end like communicated that she knew what was going on too.
Right.
Because like sometimes there are people, it's easier for them to speak through their art than it is to, you know, to just speak. And I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think the whole question of how far do you go, you know, and what do you do with the monster that's potentially inside? Can you tame it? Do you tame it? I mean, and what comes out? And we all keep thinking it's a great song that comes out.
Yeah. I know she writes a really good album,
It's a
but
really good
it's
album.
not with,
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the lesson is let your monster out.
Right.
Yeah. Nominated for 2 CSAs currently. So.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You know, I know a lot of people are curious, and you said you were all kind of thrown into this kind of quickly. So, Amelia, take us through, like, what was your shooting? I mean, I'm always amazed at independent film and how how you all pulled this off, but your shooting schedule and how long did it take to kind of shoot everything and then put it together?
Yeah, the shoot was like pretty typical for this kind of budget and stuff. I think it was 18 days. It definitely felt tight at times because they always do. It's always a lot to shoot. And I guess one of the harder parts was that we shot all of the recording studio stuff in the very first few days of shooting. So it meant Lauren had to learn all the songs very, very quickly. I think you learned them in like a week, maybe?
Yeah. And I had to like learn how to play the piano. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also the transformation was like the third day of shooting. So it was like a lot of really important, crucial elements of the film within like the first few days.
Yeah.
And then the editing process was, it's all a blur now because it is like 2 weeks after we wrapped, coronavirus everything was shutting down.
Right.
And I was going to be working remotely with the editor anyway, since I'm in Montreal and he was in Calgary. But, you know, obviously things were just kind of like exacerbated with the situation. And then, so the edit took quite a while, but then we got into Fantastic Fest for our world premiere in Austin, well, virtually in Austin.
Yeah.
And then we had only maybe 4 or 5 weeks to do all the sound and score. So it was just like really tight at the beginning, super long edit, and then really tight at the end. But yeah, and Michelle Osis, who did the score, did like a really phenomenal job in a very short span of time. So
Wow.
it all came together.
And so kind of what's next for each of you? So Catherine, I'll start with you. What are some next projects? What do we have to look forward to from each of you kind of going forward?
Yeah, I have a film coming out on Amazon Prime soon. I don't have a date, soon in the spring, called Voyeurs, which I briefly mentioned. I also get to play a queer character in that. And I've spent the last year doing motion capture as Batgirl for a video game called Gotham Knights. And yeah, I'm also like starting to be producing some projects and stuff like that. So yeah.
Excellent. And Lauren?
Yeah. Well, like Amelia was mentioning, her first horror film, Bleed With Me, is also doing the festival circuit right now. So that's I think releasing in August, you said, Amelia?
Yes, dates have not been officially brought up, but we can say August.
Oh, okay, great.
That's okay.
Sometime late summer. So that's pretty exciting because like both these films are kind of doing their festival runs and coming out within the same year, which is really awesome. then I'm also, right now, I wrote a short film with a friend of mine, and it's actually based on like our real life friendship and past breakups. And we're both queer women, and it's kind of a commentary on just the value of like platonic intimacy within the queer community and your chosen family. So I'm really excited to shoot that in June. We're going to launch a crowdfunding campaign in about a month or so. And then I also just started a comedy production company with my roommate. So we've started to kind of just dish out some comedy sketches, and we have a feature length mockumentary in the works as well. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Excellent. And then aside from the festival circuit, Amelia, I mean, what do you have going on next? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, I'm working on a script written by a writer based in Toronto, with also Lee Marshall producing, who was in my first film, who's also an actress. So yeah, we're just kind of working on that, three of us together, and trying to kind of see where that could go. But not as busy nowadays, but that's okay by me, because I'm just chilling. But yeah, I'm excited for Lauren's short film. I didn't know about this, so that's
Oh, you'll know all about it soon.
yeah, for sure.
You won't be able to get away from it.
Yeah.
And then Amelia, for Bloodthirsty, what is the film is? What is the trajectory that we're on for Bloodthirsty?
I think it's being released in the US on the 26th.
Yeah.
My third?
23rd.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
23rd? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the release for US and Canada, and then I think it's going to be released elsewhere, maybe later in the year or next year. But yeah, US will be April 23rd.
April 23rd. So I want to thank all of you for joining us for this conversation about Bloodthirsty. I hope that everyone who has seen the movie as part of Out on Film and enjoyed it, and if you're watching this conversation first, please go out and see Bloodthirsty as soon as it drops on the 23rd of April. So thank you, Amelia Moses, Lauren Beatty, and Catherine Kingstow for this conversation. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for putting this festival on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.